The great chamber of Nexus Station had never been so quiet. Representatives from 47 different species sat in stunned silence as Captain Minho Kim finished reading humanity's final statement. His voice had been calm and steady, but his words hit like a meteor strike. The Terran Federation withdraws from all galactic political entities, trade agreements, and mutual defense pacts. We are going home. Minho folded the document and looked across the massive circular chamber. Crystalline beings flickered with nervous light. Gas clouds swirled in agitation. Insect-like creatures clicked their mandibles anxiously. For 300 years, these species had counted on humanity to solve their problems. Now they were being abandoned. The Veltar Prime speaker was the first to break the silence. His crystal body flashed bright red with panic. You cannot simply leave. The stability of 17 sectors depends on human intervention. Ambassador Heian Park had been expecting this reaction. She had spent 20 years in this chamber, mediating disputes between species who seemed unable to talk to each other without human help. She had grown tired of being the galaxy's permanent babysitter. We have been your peacekeepers for 3 centuries, Heian said calmly. We have fought your wars, settled your disputes, and protected your trade routes. What have we received in return? The chamber erupted in angry voices. Species shouted over each other in dozens of languages. The universal translator struggled to keep up with the chaos. You have received our gratitude, shrieked a Nethian gas cloud. Your friendship, clicked a Bruthan warrior. Your honored place in galactic society, boomed a Corvan diplomat. Minho raised his hand for silence. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 3 centuries of human sacrifice. Dr. Jiho Lee has prepared a report. Perhaps you would like to hear the numbers. Dr. Lee stepped forward with a data pad. He was a quiet man who preferred studying alien biology to alien politics, but the numbers he had compiled told a story that could not be ignored. In 300 years of galactic involvement, humanity has fought 43 wars for other species. We have lost 2 million military personnel. We have spent 30% of our total planetary production on galactic peacekeeping operations. The chamber grew quiet as Lee continued reading. We have prevented 16 genocides, stopped 7 major invasions, and mediated over 3,000 territorial disputes. Human ships patrol trade routes that other species are afraid to defend. Human soldiers die protecting colonies that other species abandon at the first sign of trouble. A Veltar delegate interrupted. But surely you understand the importance of maintaining galactic peace. Lee looked up from his data pad. Do we? Because according to our records, every species in this chamber has at some point formally complained about human interference in their affairs. You have called us imperialistic, controlling, and heavy-handed. You have demanded that we respect your sovereignty while simultaneously begging for our protection. The truth was uncomfortable, but it was also undeniable. Humanity had become the galaxy's solution to every problem, but they had never been thanked for it. Instead, they had been criticized for being too involved while being expected to solve every crisis. Captain Wanho Nam stood from the human delegation. He was old now, but everyone in the chamber knew his reputation. He had led the fleet that stopped the Draknari expansion 50 years ago. He had saved billions of lives, and barely anyone remembered his name. I have a question for this assembly, Wanho said. When pirates attack your shipping lanes, who do you call? When the Bruthan threaten to expand beyond their borders, who do you expect to stop them? When ancient territorial disputes turn violent, who do you demand should mediate? The chamber was silent because everyone knew the answer. And when we respond to your calls for help, what do we hear? That we are interfering, that we do not understand your culture, that we should respect your independence. You want our help, but you resent our presence. Yuna Kang, humanity's military attaché, had been watching the alien faces carefully. She could see fear beginning to replace anger. For the first time, these species were realizing what a galaxy without human protection would look like. This is not a decision we made lightly, Yuna said. But we are tired of being blamed for solving problems that you create and cannot solve yourselves. The Corvan ambassador stood up, his massive frame towering over the other delegates. What about the mutual defense treaties? You cannot simply abandon your obligations. Minho smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Read the treaties more carefully. Humanity has fulfilled every obligation. We have defended our allies against external threats. But those same allies have consistently voted against human proposals in this assembly. They have undermined our authority while demanding our protection. Soman Choi, the youngest member of the human delegation, had been quiet until now. But she had grown up hearing stories of human soldiers dying for species who did not appreciate their sacrifice. She had watched her parents work endless hours to maintain galactic peace while being criticized for their efforts. You want to handle galactic affairs without human interference? Soman asked. Now you can. We will not stop you from making your own decisions. We will also not save you from the consequences of those decisions. The reality of humanity's withdrawal was beginning to sink in. Without human mediation, how would the Veltar and Nethians resolve their trade disputes? Without human military intervention, who would stop the Bruthen from expanding? Without human peacekeepers, who would protect the smaller species from the larger ones? Dr. Lee closed his data pad and looked around the chamber. For 3 centuries, we have prevented this galaxy from destroying itself. We have sacrificed our own development to maintain your stability. In return, we have been treated as a necessary evil rather than valued allies. So now we are leaving, Hyun added. You will have the independence you have always demanded. Use it wisely. As the human delegation prepared to leave, the chamber erupted in desperate pleas. But Minho had heard enough. His mind was made up, and so was humanity's. Find another way, he said simply. Within hours, human ships began leaving Nexus Station. Diplomatic quarters were emptied. Military advisors departed. Trade negotiators packed their belongings. For the first time in 3 centuries, the galaxy would have to solve its own problems. As the last human transport disappeared into hyperspace, the remaining species sat in their great chamber and wondered what they had done. The galaxy suddenly felt much larger and much more dangerous. They had no idea that their real problems were just beginning. 6 months after humanity left the galaxy to govern itself, the first cracks appeared in galactic civilization. Soman Choi sat in her office on Luna City, watching her communication screens fill with desperate messages. Her new job was surprisingly simple. Receive galactic communications, file them properly, and send the same response to everyone. No exceptions. No special cases. No emergency interventions. The Terran Federation no longer participates in galactic affairs, she typed for the 100th time that day. The message she was responding to came from the Veltar homeworld. Their crystalline cities were under attack by Bruthen war fleets. For 50 years, the Bruthen warlord Kexthanor had been contained by one simple fact. If he crossed certain lines, human ships would appear and crush his forces. Now those ships were gone. Kexthanor had waited exactly 3 weeks after humanity's departure before launching his invasion. His massive warships had crossed into Veltar space like a flood of metal and death. The crystalline beings had no military capable of stopping him. They had relied on human protection for so long that they had forgotten how to defend themselves. Soman sent the standard response and moved to the next message. This one came from the Nethian Collective, reporting that trade negotiations with solid matter species had completely collapsed. Without human mediators who could communicate with both gas-based and solid-based life forms, the different species simply could not understand each other well enough to maintain their economic relationships. Another message arrived from the Outer Rim territories. The Corvan hegemony was expanding again, absorbing smaller species into their empire. 3 minor civilizations had fallen in as many months. Their pleas for help had been answered with silence. Tae-hyun Park, Earth's director of deep space intelligence, walked into Soman's office carrying a data tablet. His face was grim as he set the device on her desk. The intelligence reports are getting worse, he said quietly. The galaxy is falling apart faster than our worst-case predictions. Soman looked at the data streaming across her screens. 17 active conflicts, trade routes shutting down, diplomatic relations collapsing. Species that had coexisted peacefully for centuries were now at each other's throats. "Maybe we should have expected this," she said. "We were the glue holding galactic civilization together. Without us, everything falls apart." But Taehyun shook his head. "It gets worse. We have reports of something new moving in the outer systems. The Draknari collective is active again." Soman felt a chill run down her spine. The Draknari had been quiet for 50 years, ever since Captain Wonho Nam had crushed their expansion attempt. They had retreated to their isolated star systems and disappeared from galactic politics. Everyone had assumed they had learned their lesson. "How active?" Soman asked. "Very active, and they have technology that makes the rest of the galaxy look primitive." Unikang had been tracking Draknari movements from her position as an independent information broker. She had left government service after humanity's withdrawal, but she could not stop watching the galaxy's decline. What she discovered about the Draknari made her blood run cold. The Draknari had not been idle during their 50 years of isolation. They had been preparing. They had studied every human military tactic, analyzed every piece of human technology, and developed countermeasures for everything. More importantly, they had been waiting for exactly this moment. "They call it the human solution," Una reported to Earth's intelligence services. "They spent 5 decades preparing for a galaxy without human oversight. And now they are implementing something called optimization protocols." The first reports of these protocols came from the frontier worlds. Draknari ships would arrive at inhabited systems and scan the local populations. Then they would issue a simple ultimatum: submit to optimization or be eliminated. Optimization, it turned out, meant the complete restructuring of a species according to Draknari efficiency standards. Individual consciousness was considered wasteful. Cultural diversity was seen as inefficient. Artistic expression was classified as a resource drain. Species that submitted to optimization became standardized worker units in the Draknari industrial machine. Species that refused were simply eliminated. The galaxy's response was predictably chaotic. The same species that had complained about human interference now tried to form defensive coalitions. But they had spent 3 centuries letting humans handle military planning and coordination. They had no idea how to organize effective resistance. The Veltar tried to coordinate with the Nethians, but the 2 species still could not communicate effectively without human translators. The crystalline beings thought in terms of light patterns and harmonic frequencies. The gas-based Nethians thought in terms of pressure waves and chemical gradients. Their concepts of time, space, and strategy were completely incompatible. The Bruthan, who were skilled warriors, refused to work with species they considered weak. They insisted on handling the Draknari threat alone. Their war fleets charged into Draknari space with great courage and were systematically destroyed by technology they did not understand. The smaller species panicked and began surrendering preemptively. If the mighty Bruthan could not stand against the Draknari, what chance did anyone else have? Wonho Nam, now retired to a quiet farm on Earth, watched the reports with growing concern. He understood the Draknari better than most humans. He had fought them before and won, but only because they had underestimated human capabilities. This time, they had spent 50 years studying human tactics. They would not make the same mistake twice. "They are not just conquering territory," he explained to a gathering of former military officers. "They are implementing a systematic transformation of galactic civilization. They want to optimize the entire galaxy according to their standards." The implications were terrifying. The Draknari did not want to rule other species. They wanted to remake them. Every unique culture, every individual consciousness, every creative thought would be eliminated in favor of standardized efficiency. Within 8 months of humanity's withdrawal, 14 species had been absorbed into the Draknari collective. The galaxy that had resented human intervention was learning what the universe looked like without guardians. The desperate communications flooding into Earth's communication centers told the story of a civilization in collapse. Ancient alliances were crumbling. Trade networks were shutting down. Refugee fleets were fleeing from system to system with nowhere to go, and through it all, Earth's response remained the same. The Terran Federation no longer participates in galactic affairs. Salmon processed another batch of emergency requests and sent the standard response. But as she watched her screens fill with reports of burning worlds and extinct species, she began to wonder if humanity had made a terrible mistake. The galaxy had wanted independence from human oversight. Now they had it. But independence, it turned out, came with a price that many species were not prepared to pay. The Draknari expansion continued, and the galaxy's screams for help echoed through empty space. Humanity listened to every plea, recorded every atrocity, and did absolutely nothing. They had learned their lesson about being taken for granted. The galaxy was learning its lesson about taking guardians for granted. The education was proving to be more expensive than anyone had imagined. The delegation that arrived at Earth was the most desperate collection of beings ever assembled. Former enemies sat side by side in the cramped transport ship, united only by their shared terror of extinction. The Veltar Prime Speaker, who had once demanded human withdrawal from galactic affairs, now begged for an audience with anyone who would listen. Byung-ho Shin met them in a small conference room in Geneva. The choice of location was deliberate. Instead of the grand diplomatic chambers where galactic politics had once been conducted, Earth's Director of External Affairs had chosen a modest room with simple furniture and no ceremonial decorations. The message was clear. This was not a negotiation between equals. "We appreciate your visit," Byung-ho said politely, "but our position has not changed." The Veltar Prime Speaker's crystalline form had lost much of its usual brilliance. Months of war and displacement had dimmed his natural light to a pale flicker. He activated a holographic projector with trembling appendages. 23 species extinct in 1 year, he said, his voice breaking with grief. The Draknari optimization protocols are spreading across the outer rim. Entire civilizations are being converted into worker units or simply eliminated. Please, you must help us. Byung-ho studied the holographic data without emotion. The images showed burning worlds, empty space where star systems used to exist, and refugee fleets fleeing through the darkness with nowhere to go. It was exactly what Earth's intelligence services had been predicting for months. "We must do nothing," Byung-ho said calmly. "You wanted independence from human interference. You have it." The Nethian representative, a swirling cloud of gas contained in a portable atmosphere suit, pulsed with agitation. "But surely you cannot watch an entire galaxy burn." "Can we not?" Byung-ho asked. "For 3 centuries we were told that our help was unwanted. We were called imperialistic, controlling, heavy-handed. You demanded that we respect your sovereignty. We are respecting it now." What the delegation did not know was that humanity had been watching everything. Taehyun Park, Director of Deep Space Intelligence, had maintained a network of monitoring stations throughout the galaxy. Every Draknari movement, every species fall, every desperate battle was recorded and analyzed in exhaustive detail. The data painted a picture that was even worse than the delegation realized. The Draknari were not just conquering territory. They were implementing a systematic transformation of galactic civilization that would ultimately eliminate every form of consciousness, except their own. Nyan Kim, one of Earth's leading military strategists, had been running computer simulations since the withdrawal began. Her models showed the same result every time. Without intervention, the Draknari would control 60% of the galaxy within 5 years and 90% within a decade. But humanity's position remained unchanged. Admiral Seokjin Jang, commanding the Terran Defense Fleet, had been explicit in his orders. Defend human space and nothing more. Let the galaxy that had rejected human leadership face the consequences of its choices. The Bruthen delegate, a massive warrior whose species had once boasted of their military prowess, now sat slumped in defeat. His people's war fleets had been systematically destroyed by Draknari technology that turned their own weapons against them. "We were wrong," he admitted quietly. "We thought we were strong enough to handle our own defense. We were wrong about everything." The Corvan ambassador nodded in agreement. "Our expansion was stopped within days. The Draknari did not just defeat our fleets. They converted our soldiers into their worker units. Our own people now fight against us. Byung-ho listened to their confessions without sympathy. These were the same species that had spent decades complaining about human military presence in their territories. They had wanted to handle their own security. Now they were learning what security meant when facing an enemy that did not follow the rules of civilized warfare. You are asking us to sacrifice human lives to save species that openly despised us, Byung-ho said. How many of our soldiers should die for your mistakes? The Veltar Prime speaker flickered with desperate light patterns. We will give you anything. Technology, resources, territory, name your price. Our price was respect and cooperation, Byung-ho replied. You refused to pay it for 3 centuries. Why should we trust you now? The truth was that the delegation had no answer to that question. They had treated humanity as a convenient solution to their problems, while simultaneously resenting human authority. They had wanted protection without acknowledging the protectors. They had demanded intervention without accepting responsibility. Minji Cho, monitoring the situation from a hidden observation post near Draknari space, transmitted her latest report to Earth. The news was worse than anyone had expected. The Andromeda's cluster had gone completely dark. All 17 inhabited systems showed no biological signatures. The Draknari were no longer just conquering civilizations. They were sterilizing entire regions of space. They are not taking prisoners anymore, Minji reported. They have decided that biological optimization is too slow. Now they simply eliminate all organic life and replace it with artificial constructs. On Earth, the debate that had been building for months finally reached a breaking point. President Jung-Hwan Lee convened an emergency session of the Global Council to decide humanity's final position on galactic affairs. We are watching genocide on a cosmic scale, argued Subin Park, Secretary of Xenological Affairs. Every moral principle we claim to hold demands action, Admiral Seokjin Jang disagreed. We tried moral action for 3 centuries. We were told repeatedly that our intervention was imperialism, that our protection was unwanted, that our sacrifices were unappreciated. How many human lives are we supposed to spend on species that openly despised us? Hyunjin Kim, Earth's most respected philosopher, offered a different perspective. The question is not what they deserve. The question is who we choose to be. If we allow conscious beings to be exterminated when we have the power to prevent it, what does that make us? The debate continued for hours, but the turning point came from an unexpected source. Woo Jin Nam, a teenage student from Seoul, had been monitoring galactic communications as part of a school project. What he discovered changed everything. Hidden in the Draknari's encrypted transmissions, he found references to something called the human solution. The Draknari had been studying human military doctrine, technology, and psychology for 50 years. Their optimization protocols were not just about galactic conquest. They were specifically designed to create a civilization capable of standing against human intervention. The Draknari had been preparing for war with humanity all along. They are not just eliminating other species for efficiency, explained Eugene Lee, Director of Strategic Analysis. They are eliminating potential human allies. When they are done with the galaxy, they will come for us with overwhelming numerical advantage and complete knowledge of our capabilities. The delegation in Geneva was dismissed without any promises of help. As they prepared to leave Earth, the Veltar Prime speaker made one final plea. We understand now. We were wrong to resent your guidance, but surely you cannot watch an entire galaxy burn? Byung-ho's response would be quoted in history texts for centuries. You taught us that our help was unwanted. We learned the lesson. Well, but even as the delegation departed in despair, the Global Council was reaching its decision. The vote was close. 847 in favor of intervention, 731 against, with 122 abstentions. By the narrowest margin in the Global Council's history, humanity chose to return to galactic affairs. But this time they would not be peacekeepers. They would not be mediators. They would not be the galaxy's patient guardians. This time they would be something the galaxy had never seen before. Humanity unchained. The first sign that something had changed came when Draknari deep space monitors detected massive energy signatures emerging from the Sol system. Ships unlike anything in their databases were moving toward the galactic core at impossible speeds. The readings made no sense. According to their calculations, the energy signatures were too large to be real. Captain Do-Hyun Kang stood on the bridge of the reclamation, watching the tactical display show his fleet's approach to the first target. Behind him, 10,000 ships moved through hyperspace in perfect formation. Each vessel incorporated technology that humanity had developed during their 2 years of isolation. They had not been idle while the galaxy burned. "All ships report ready," announced Commander Ara Kim from the Fleet Operations Center. "Quantum disruptors are charged. Particle barriers are active. We are go for Operation Cleansing Fire." The name was not chosen lightly. This would not be a peacekeeping mission or a humanitarian intervention. The Global Council had been very clear in their instructions. Complete elimination of the Draknari threat. No negotiations, no prisoners, no mercy. The Draknari had expected humans to fight like the species they remembered. Careful, measured. Always trying to minimize casualties and preserve galactic stability. They had prepared for humanity to follow the same rules of engagement that had governed 3 centuries of human peacekeeping. They were not prepared for humanity unchained. The first target was Kethvar, a fortress world that the Draknari had converted into a massive processing center for biological optimization. Millions of captured aliens were being systematically converted into worker units. The planet's surface was covered with industrial complexes designed to strip away individual consciousness and replace it with programmed efficiency. "Begin the operation," Do-Hyun ordered. The reclamation's quantum disruptors fired once. The fortress world of Kethvar, along with its moon and 3 orbital stations, was reduced to fundamental particles. The entire planetary system simply ceased to exist. "Target eliminated," Ara reported calmly. "Moving to next objective." Across the galaxy, Draknari commanders struggled to understand what was happening. Their sensors showed human ships appearing in their territory. But the weapons being used were beyond their comprehension. Planets were not being invaded or bombarded. They were being deleted from existence. Mingyu Park, commanding the Liberation forces in the Outer Rim, broadcast a message across all galactic frequencies. His voice was calm and professional, like someone announcing a weather report. "To all surviving free species, humanity has returned. Remain in your designated safe zones until operations are complete. To the Draknari Collective, your optimization ends now." The Draknari response was swift and massive. They had spent 50 years preparing for this moment, and their fleets moved to engage the human forces with overwhelming numerical superiority. For every human ship, there were 100 Draknari vessels. Their technology had been specifically designed to counter known human capabilities. But the humans they faced were not the ones they had studied. The Battle of Nexus Void lasted 12 minutes. 3,000 Draknari ships engaged a human squadron of 30 vessels. When the fighting ended, the Draknari fleet had been completely destroyed while the human ships had suffered no casualties. The wreckage drifted through space, still trying to figure out what had hit them. "Draknari technology is impressive," Admiral Seokjin Jang noted in his battle report. "Unfortunately for them, it was designed to fight the humans we used to be." The systematic dismantling of the Draknari collective proceeded with mechanical efficiency. Human fleets appeared at strategic locations throughout Draknari space, eliminated all resistance, and moved on to the next target. There were no prolonged battles, no desperate last stands, no dramatic confrontations. The Draknari infrastructure was simply erased sector by sector. Jae-Hyun Cho commanded the forces responsible for liberating the captured populations. His ships arrived at processing centers just in time to save millions of aliens who were being prepared for optimization. But where previous human interventions would have focused on rebuilding and rehabilitation, this operation was different. "Liberate the prisoners and destroy the facilities," were his standing orders. "Do not establish governance protocols. Do not provide reconstruction assistance. We are not here to rebuild. We are here to remove threats." The surviving species watched in amazement and terror as humanity demolished the Draknari Empire in less than 3 months. The same humans who had spent centuries carefully mediating disputes and minimizing casualties now moved through space like a force of nature, eliminating entire star systems with casual efficiency. But the real shock came when the liberated species realized that humanity had no intention of resuming their old role as galactic guardians. Seo-young Kim, Earth's new director of galactic relations, met with representatives of the surviving species on a neutral station. The meeting was brief and to the point. The Draknari threat has been eliminated, she announced. Human forces will maintain patrol routes to ensure no similar threat emerges. Beyond that, galactic governance is your responsibility. The Veltar Prime Speaker, his crystalline form bright with relief and confusion, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. When will you begin establishing new governance protocols? How will you organize the reconstruction efforts? Seo-young's response redefined humanity's relationship with galactic civilization. We will not. You wanted independence from human oversight. You still have it. We removed the threat that would have destroyed you. What you do now is your choice. The implications slowly sank in. Humanity now possessed overwhelming military superiority throughout the galaxy, but they refused to govern, mediate, or protect. They would ensure that no species could threaten others on the scale the Draknari had, but local conflicts would be ignored entirely. You must understand, the Bruthan delegate pleaded. Without human guidance, we will make mistakes. Species will fight each other. There will be conflicts. Yes, Seo-young agreed calmly. There will be. And you will solve them yourselves, or suffer the consequences. We are no longer interested in preventing you from making mistakes. We are only interested in preventing anyone from making mistakes large enough to threaten galactic civilization. The new doctrine was simple and terrifying. Humanity would patrol the galaxy like cosmic apex predators, ensuring that no threat could grow beyond local significance. But they would not intervene in smaller conflicts, would not mediate disputes, and would not protect species from the consequences of their own decisions. Wan Ho Nam, recalled from retirement to help establish the new patrol protocols, explained, "The philosophy to confused alien ambassadors. For 3 centuries we protected you from yourselves and from each other. You resented our protection and demanded independence. Now you have it. Use it wisely." The galaxy that emerged from humanity's return was simultaneously more free and more dangerous than it had ever been. Species had to develop their own solutions to conflicts, build their own defenses, and take responsibility for their own survival. The safety net was gone, replaced by a simple guarantee: behave responsibly or face extinction alone. In the outer rim, human monitoring stations watched and waited. Advanced sensor arrays tracked every ship movement, every weapons test, every sign of aggressive expansion. The message was clear. The galaxy could govern itself however it chose, but certain lines would not be crossed. The universe had trembled when humanity walked away from galactic politics. It trembled again when they returned. But this time the trembling came with understanding. Humanity was no longer the galaxy's guardian or mediator. They were its ultimate authority, and they would not be taken for granted again. The age of human patience was over. The age of cosmic responsibility had begun. And in the silence between the stars, every species learned to watch their step. 50 years had passed since humanity's return to galactic affairs, and the universe had learned to live with the new reality. The great chamber that had once housed 47 species now held representatives from only 18 civilizations. The others had either been destroyed by the Draknari, absorbed into larger empires, or simply faded away when they could no longer rely on human protection to solve their problems. Young-ho Kim, Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Assembly, stood before the much smaller gathering of species. His role was very different from the ambassadors who had come before him. He was not here to mediate disputes or negotiate treaties. He was here to observe and, when necessary, to deliver warnings. "The annual assembly will now come to order," announced the current assembly president, a Veltar who had survived the dark years of the Draknari expansion. First item on the agenda, the territorial dispute between the Corvan hegemony and the Nethian collective. Young-ho listened as the two species presented their cases. The Corvins claimed mining rights to a cluster of asteroids rich in rare metals. The Nethians argued that the asteroids were in their traditional territory and should remain under their control. It was exactly the kind of dispute that would have required months of human mediation in the old days. Now, the assembly was expected to resolve it themselves. The debate continued for hours. Both sides presented evidence, argued precedent, and made passionate appeals for support. Other species asked pointed questions and suggested compromises. Slowly, painfully, a solution began to emerge. It was not perfect. Neither side got everything they wanted. But it was workable, and more importantly, it was their own solution. The Corvins would receive mining rights to 60% of the asteroids in exchange for providing advanced technology to help the Nethians develop their gas processing industry. Young-Ho made a note in his report. Local dispute resolved through assembly mediation, no intervention required. This was the new reality. Species had learned to solve their own problems because they no longer had a choice. The alternative was to face the consequences alone, and 50 years of independence had taught them that those consequences could be severe. The second item on the agenda was more serious. Intelligence reports indicated that a group of former Draknari worlds were attempting to rebuild their optimization technology. The revelation sent a chill through the chamber. "What is humanity's position on this development?" asked the Bruthan representative. Young-Ho stood and delivered his response. With calm authority, if the reports are accurate, the threat will be eliminated within 72 hours. All species are advised to avoid the affected systems until operations are complete. There were no questions about jurisdiction, no debates about proportional response, no demands for evidence or due process. Everyone understood that certain lines could not be crossed. Attempting to rebuild Draknari technology was one of those lines. The session was adjourned and representatives dispersed to their ships. As they left, Young-Ho reflected on how much the galaxy had changed since humanity's withdrawal and return. First decade after the Draknari elimination had been chaotic. Species that had relied on human guidance for centuries suddenly found themselves responsible for their own decisions. Many made terrible mistakes. Small wars erupted over resources and territory. Trade agreements collapsed when there were no human mediators to resolve disputes. But those who survived learned valuable lessons. The Veltar and Nethians had finally developed effective communication protocols, spending years learning to understand each other's fundamentally different ways of thinking. The crystalline beings had learned to interpret the pressure wave language of the gas clouds, while the Nethians had developed technology to read light pattern communications. The surviving smaller species had formed defensive alliances that actually worked. Without the safety net of human protection, they had been forced to cooperate or face extinction. The alliances were based on mutual self-interest rather than imposed treaties, making them more stable and effective than anything the old Galactic Council had managed. The Bruthan had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation. Once a proud warrior species that scorned cooperation with weaker races, they had learned the value of alliance after losing most of their fleet to the Draknari. Now they provided military training to smaller species in exchange for technological assistance and resource sharing. But the changes went deeper than politics and military alliances. The galaxy had developed what sociologists called cosmic maturity, the understanding that actions had consequences that could not be avoided through appeals to powerful protectors. Minji Cho, now serving as Director of Galactic Monitoring, reviewed the quarterly reports from human observation posts throughout the galaxy. The data showed a universe that was more stable than it had been in centuries, despite, or perhaps because of, the absence of active human management. Species are taking responsibility for their own security, she noted in her analysis. Interspecies conflicts are being resolved through negotiation rather than force, because everyone understands that military aggression might trigger human intervention. The threat of our response has become a more effective peacekeeping force than our actual presence ever was. The monitoring stations themselves were a reminder of the new reality. Advanced sensor arrays tracked every significant military movement, every weapons development program, every sign of expansionist ambition. The message was clear. The galaxy was being watched, and certain behaviors would not be tolerated. But the Watchers remained invisible unless needed. Human patrol fleets moved through hyperspace along routes that no other species could track. They appeared only when necessary, eliminated threats with overwhelming force, and then disappeared again into the darkness between the stars. This had happened 17 times in 50 years. Species that attempted to develop planet-killing weapons found their research facilities reduced to particles. Governments that tried to implement systematic oppression of other species discovered their leadership had mysteriously vanished. Pirates who attacked too many ships in protected space lanes would encounter human hunters and simply cease to exist. The galaxy had learned that certain behaviors triggered responses that could not be negotiated with, bribed, or reasoned away. Humanity had become less like galactic police and more like a force of nature, invisible most of the time, but absolutely devastating when aroused. Wan Ho Nam, now in his final years but still serving as an advisor to Earth's defense planning committee, had watched the transformation with satisfaction. "We spent 3 centuries teaching the galaxy to depend on us," he observed. "It took 50 years to teach them to depend on themselves. Both lessons were necessary." The annual assembly concluded with the traditional reading of the Galactic Compact, the document that had emerged from the ashes of the old Galactic Council. It was much shorter than the previous charter, consisting of just 3 principles. First, all species have the right to govern themselves according to their own values and traditions. Second, no species has the right to impose their values or traditions on others through force or coercion. Third, violations of the second principle that threaten galactic stability will result in immediate intervention by humanity. The compact was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Species could do almost anything they wanted within their own territories, but any attempt to expand through conquest or oppression would bring down the full weight of human military power. As the last representatives departed, Young Ho transmitted his final report to Earth. Assembly session concluded. 18 species in attendance. All local disputes resolved through diplomatic means. No intervention required. Galaxy remains stable under current protocols. He paused before adding his personal assessment. The universe has learned to tremble at the right times, and in that trembling, it has found peace. Somewhere in the depths of space, human monitoring stations continued their silent watch. The galaxy governed itself now, but it did so under the watchful eyes of guardians who no longer felt obligated to be gentle. The age of human patience was over. The age of cosmic responsibility had proven to be exactly what the universe needed, and in the darkness between the stars, humanity waited and watched, ready to remind anyone who forgot the lessons of the past that some powers should never be taken for granted. The universe had trembled when humanity walked away from galactic politics. It continued to tremble softly and respectfully now that they had returned, and in that quiet trembling, 47 species had learned the difference between dependence and respect, between protection and dominance, between guardians and gods. The Ko lesson had been expensive, but it had been learned well.